One of my favorite things to do is take viewer questions and try to answer them the best that I can. Today, we have ourselves a fun one that I think is worth the conversation, and I hope that you find this informative, and hopefully this gives you a little bit of insight into construction standards for drain fields. What is the question, you might be asking? Well, today our question comes from our good friend Hip Chip. The question that they asked is, I had a hole appear in the drain field and I can see the pipe. I figured maybe a root had bursted through the pipe. I dug a small hole in that area and the pipe looks fine. However, there are 3 other pipes that end at the same spot that are open at the end. They all seem to have some dirt/sand in the end. I haven't run the washing machine to see if water comes out of any of those pipes. Comments? ? So this is a fun one. And the reason why I think this is a fun one is because there's a couple different ways that this can go, and I think it depends on the orientation of your system. I haven't looked at this system, so we're kind of going based off of that comment alone, and we're going to guess and put some extrapolation into it. When you have a tank, you have to have somewhere to get rid of that water. In our area, generally, you'll have 1 pipe out of the tank, a distribution box if there's multiple drain fields, and then your legs will go out, and then they'll run parallel with one another between 40 to 100 feet, depending on how long you need the trench to be. With that assumption, I'm assuming your system is the same as how we do it. Now, there are some systems back in the past where they would run them in series with one another, meaning you would have tank, solid pipe, drain field, hooks left or right, solid pipe again, and then it double backs on itself with the perforated pipe. That method's not super common anymore, and the reason why is you're more likely to run into some problems. So a lot of people would not be doing that, and all of our counties, as far as I'm aware in the state of Maryland, no longer let you run things in series. You have to have a distribution box if you have multiple drain fields. Let's talk a little bit about how do drain fields actually get constructed. It's pretty straightforward. Basically, what they're going to do is they're going to take the width of a bucket, usually between 2 and 3 feet, depending on where you're at. They're going to dig a straight line back. Most of the time, that trench will be anywhere from 2 to 10 feet deep, depending on your perk rate. Story for a different time on what a perk rate is, but basically you need that in order to figure out how big does the system need to be, how long does it need to be, how deep, etc., and where's the soil types at. So you have your trench being dug. When you're doing this, it's very important that that trench remains level. Why do you want the trench to be level? The purpose of having the trench being level is so that way when the water goes out of the tank into the distribution box, it will evenly disperse into your trenches and not bleed out. What is a bleed out? A bleed out is when the slope in the pipe forces all the water to go from the distribution box through the line towards the end of the pipe rather than using the front. An argument could be made that if it hits the back, it'll fill its way back towards the tank, but in practice, doesn't really ever work out that way. The normal operation of a drain field is water goes into the box, and then the first little chunk of the drain field, that's where the perforations are, is going to allow the water out of the pipe. The stone that's in the drain field is just there to open the soil up, so that way when the water goes out of the pipe, it's able to kind of use the entire side of the trench and the bottom of the trench to dissipate that liquid so it absorbs back into the soil. The soil is your filtering media. No matter how well you take care of your system, a little bit of debris, biomat, is going to go from the tank into the trench and into the soil. With enough of it, you will actually plug up that drain field, and after that, it's game over and it's time to replace. In your circumstance, it kind of sounds like you might be having an issue with the trench having been sloped instead of level. And is it the end of the world? No, but you do need to be a little bit careful now that you've exposed it, because you don't want to have that stuff exposed. At least in our state, that's a health hazard and can get you in a lot of trouble with the health department. When you have the water going out towards the bottom of it, a lot of trenches will have either dirt or stone at the end of the trench. Modern systems, it's going to be stone with the stand pipes that we can actually see into the trench. Older systems, a lot of times it'd be a combination of stone and dirt. Sometimes in really old systems, like if you have one from like the 70s, it might just be dirt. That's just kind of how it is in most cases. The weird part about what you've got going on is that you have 3 pipes that end at that point. So my concern is I think you might have found the distribution box, potentially. And the reason I make this concern is if the distribution box collapsed, that could be what you're seeing as an end result, is the water is going from the tank into that area and it's washing away all of the dirt. And I'm surprised you haven't had any backups, but if you're having a surfacing issue, it's very likely it might be the distribution box, not the end of the trench. How do you determine where this is? Well, the easiest way to do this is take a hose from your spigot outside, stick that hose into your septic tank, let the water run, go back to the hole where you have all 3 of those pipes and watch what's going on. You should see water coming out of one of those pipes, not all 3. If you have water coming out of all 3, what that tells me is that for some reason they kind of went back onto themselves, which would be very uncommon in our state, but depending on your state might be totally normal. You're gonna need somebody to take a look at the full system just to kind of give you an idea of exactly what's going on. But most drain field systems, as far as I'm aware, and every system I've seen in our state has never came back on itself. Once you run water into the tank and you see that one of the pipes is discharging the water and the other 2 or so are receiving the water, that answers our question that yes, it's a distribution box and you just have to replace the box. If pipes are discharging water and the water is bubbling up to the surface, you do have a potential for that system might have failed, right? It might be time to get it replaced depending on how old it is and what it actually is doing. That's why it's very important to make sure that with situations like this, you might want to consider having the local professional come take a look at it to make sure things are good to go. The reason for this is, at least in Maryland, as a homeowner, if a neighbor sees that and complains, they can come after you with fines until you rectify the situation. At that point, it's gotten very expensive and very tedious, and nobody wants to deal with that amount of paperwork. With all of this being said, I know we covered a lot of ground, but I hope that you found this helpful. If you have a comment or a question, even if it's not in the same category, leave it below. I like answering these kind of questions, or at least giving you my insight into what might be possibly going on. In this particular situation, it kind of sounds like you might have an issue with the distribution box. It's very possible that it could be the end of the drain fields. It would just be very odd for that to be the case. I'm not used to your particular area. I have no idea where you're at, but in Maryland, nobody does it that way where the end of the pipes intersect with one another. The only point where that would happen is the distribution box, so I'm thinking you might have the issue specifically there. Generally speaking, in our area, replacement of a distribution box is anywhere from $1,500 to $2,500, depending on who you go with and how many trenches you got to deal with. This is one of those things that you don't want to let go for quite a while because things will not work for a good bit. This is one of those things that you don't want to let go for a while because it just compounds the issue. Much like everything in life, the longer you let a problem go on, the more likely you are to run into some more headaches down the road. The main headache is that you could be facing fines if a neighbor starts to complain on you. The likelihood of that all really depends on how close you are to neighbors. If you're kind of like me, you don't really have anybody that's close by, so it doesn't really matter. But you do want to be careful because that is sewage. So if you have children playing around, yourself, dogs, animals, stuff like that, if you just have sewage spilling into an open pit or open hole in the ground, probably not the best idea. You probably should get that fixed. My advice would be to definitely contact a local professional, have them give a full evaluation of the system, whether that's excavating the tank, running a camera, excavating the distribution box, if where you're at's not the distribution box, and then kind of come up with a game plan of how do you address whatever's happening from there on. Like I said, I think that you're probably looking at a distribution box, but it really depends on how your system is configured and what it was designed as. If you found this informative, if you found this useful in any way, if you like this style of content, make sure you hit that like button, hit subscribe. I have more videos posted every day on the world of wells, septic, DIY projects, home improvement, and just basic budgeting tips. Anyway, guys, I will see you tomorrow.